Hey, everybody, it is Thursday, May 23rd, 2024. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, I should begin this May 23rd by wishing you a happy Chardonnay Day. Apparently it is Chardonnay Day wherever Chardonnay Day is celebrated.
I believe it's probably wherever Chardonnay has a PR person, right?
That's usually how these days get named. You were telling me, though, Chardonnay, not one of your favorite white wines. What is your favorite white wine, Jill?
I like a Sauvignon Blanc, if that's how you pronounce it, a Sincere. I don't know, something about Chardonnay, just it's not my favorite. I don't turn it down, I will say that. Mm-hmm. I will seldom turn down wine of any kind, but if I had to pick, it's not my favorite. And you?
You know, on the reds, I like a good Rioja. I like a good Tempranillo. I like a good Malbec. When we were in Argentina a few years back, I discovered Charantes, which I enjoyed. And so there you have it, Jill. Those are my wines. Though, you know, for the birthday, I decided to go with a dirty vodka martini on the rocks, extra olives. That's my beverage of choice.
Well, now we're talking, Moshe. Especially if those olives are filled with blue cheese.
Oh, see, I'm not a blue cheese person, which people find shocking. It hurts them. Blue cheese people are hurt when I say I'm not into blue cheese olives, but I digress. We got a lot of news to get to today. Actual news, unless you like wine talk with Moshe and Jill, which we should launch as a separate pod.
Yes, it's a Friday happy hour podcast.
Maybe for Memorial Day weekend, if we have the time.
Okay, now to the headlines. She called him unhinged and toxic, but now she's endorsing him. Why Nikki Haley decided to finally endorse Donald Trump.
Jill, those aren't the only things she called him. We'll go through the full list for you in the pod.
More countries say that they'll recognize a Palestinian state effective immediately, but what exactly does that mean? It comes as families of female Israeli hostages release graphic footage of their abduction to Gaza, as the families try to push for some type of hostage deal to get their loved ones home. Meanwhile, the Pentagon says none of the aid that's been unloaded from that U.S. pier off the coast of Gaza has been delivered to the broader Palestinian people. Back here in the United States, violent tornadoes have caused multiple deaths in Iowa. 5 Americans held in Turks and Caicos for having ammunition. And U.S. lawmakers try to secure the release of 5 Americans being held in Turks and Caicos for traveling with ammunition.
Yeah, we'll tell you about a lesson we should all learn: to check your luggage to make sure it's completely empty before you head abroad.
For the students graduating in 2024, some are struggling to get jobs in areas like tech and finance. And the decaf coffee debate, we're not talking about whether or not you should drink decaf versus regular coffee, but some groups and lawmakers are raising concerns about how decaf coffee is made. Plus, Moshe is on this day in history.
A bit of Bonnie and Clyde history on this day, Jill. The OG Bonnie and Clyde, not Hove and Bee, if you catch my drift.
I catch it. All right, some big political news. Nikki Haley announcing on Wednesday that she will be voting for Donald Trump in the general election. And this was actually a big question, given the personal rivalry and the insults that they lobbed at one another during the Republican primary season. Haley suspended her bid for the GOP nomination 2 months ago, as she couldn't beat Trump in a single state through Super Tuesday. But at the time, she didn't immediately endorse him. She accused Trump of causing chaos and disregarding the importance of U.S. alliances around the world. And she also questioned whether or not he was too old to be president again. But let's take a listen to what she had to say yesterday.
Trump has not been perfect on these policies. I've made that clear many, many times. But Biden has been a catastrophe. So I will be voting for Trump. Having said that, I stand by what I said in my suspension speech. Trump would be smart to reach out to the millions of people who voted for me and continue to support me, and not assume that they're just going to be with him. And I genuinely hope he does that.
So Moshe, not exactly a ringing endorsement there, but definitely news that she is going to be voting for him.
Yeah, Jill, and the disappointment among the Nikki Haley fans on our Instagram feed was fast and furious yesterday. People really thinking that she would hold out here, disappointed because, in particular, she still has about 20% of Republican primary voters, even though she's been out of the election, out of the race for 2 months. In recent primary states, she continues to get 15 to 20%. These are people who have decided to vote in the Republican primary, but do not like Donald Trump and continue to vote for her as a protest vote. And so they had high hopes that she would hold out, given all the things she said about him. Let's go through just a few. So over the course of 6 months, Nikki Haley said the following about Donald Trump. He's totally unhinged. He's literally unhinged. He has diminished faculties. He's toxic. He's unstable. He's vengeful. He lacks moral clarity. He's self-absorbed. He's chaotic. He's clearly insecure. We could go on, but that's our top 10 list, if you will, of things that she called him during the campaign, saying that, she doesn't trust him to run the country again. That was part of her case for running for the nomination. Of course, she didn't win, but it is a sign that he has effectively complete control over the Republican Party. And most significantly, if you listen to her words there, she's basically saying what a lot of people are saying, which is, I don't like either of these guys, but I think Biden is a catastrophe. Those were her words yesterday. By the way, we should be reminded of the fact that Trump, for his part, mocked her husband, mocked her Indian heritage, mocking her name at times. He called her talentless, not tough, not smart, not respected, disloyal, an imposter, that there's no way she would ever be his vice president. And then, of course, his favorite nickname for her during the entire campaign, Bird Brain, at one point sending his campaign center a bird cage. And so that's sort of the heat of things between January and March. This is not unusual. Remember, all of the various nicknames he had for the other Republicans in 2016, and they all came around: Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Lindsey Graham, etc., to endorse him. I think the one candidate here who hasn't endorsed him, Chris Christie. I'd be shocked to see that, but I guess he may come in the fall and say, I don't like Biden. Biden's worse than Trump too, after saying that they don't trust him with the presidency. So there you have it. I don't see them holding hands at any point soon. Trump has not gone above and beyond, or frankly gone anywhere, to try to recruit her voters, but she decided to make this call yesterday. So we'll see what comes of it as he chooses his VP. He has said explicitly as he chooses his VP.
And Moshe, on that note, is there any way that he picks Nikki Haley as his vice president?
To quote Dumb and Dumber, 1 in a million. So you're saying there's a chance? That's where I would put it. I'd put it at 1 in a million. He does know, though, listen, Trump didn't get to where he's going by not being politically savvy. He realizes that Nikki Haley as VP would effectively lock him in, he thinks, to winning in November. But there's a lot of people around him who are telling him she will not be loyal to you. She will leak stories on you, and she'll already be running for president the first day she gets in as VP for 2028, knowing that you only have 1 term left as president. So I think he would consider it. I think there's a lot of people telling him, no way, Donald, do not do this, especially if your lesson from the last presidency was that Mike Pence wasn't loyal enough to you.
All right, now let's head to the latest in the Middle East. To begin with, Norway, Ireland, and Spain have now recognized a Palestinian state effective immediately. It is a historic move, condemned by Israel and praised by the Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority President, Mahmoud Abbas, is urging other countries to follow suit. Hamas weighed in, calling it an important, quote, step on the path to establishing our right to our land. They're among about 140 countries that recognize a Palestinian state, almost all of them in Africa, Asia, and South America. The U.S. and Britain say that they back the idea of a Palestinian state alongside Israel, but that it should come as part of a negotiated settlement with Israel. Israel, for its part, has now recalled its ambassadors from Ireland, Spain, and Norway, saying that unilaterally recognizing a Palestinian state right now is basically rewarding the October 7th massacre by Hamas. Israel's foreign ministry saying that these countries intend to send a message to the Palestinians in the entire world: terror pays, and that they're basically giving a prize to Hamas and Iran. Norway, though, says the terror has been committed by Hamas and militant groups who are not supporters of a two-state solution and the state of Israel. Palestine has a fundamental right to an independent state. So Moshe, I know you got a ton of questions about this today on Instagram. So what, if anything, does this actually mean? And one question that I thought was particularly interesting, if the Palestinians are cheering this on, does that mean that they accept the borders of their state and that they are technically no longer considered refugees?
A lot of complicated questions here, Jill. First things first. What does this actually do for practical purposes? Nothing. These three countries join the 130-something others that have already recognized a Palestinian state. But ultimately, to the point critics bring up, what are the borders? They haven't had elections in more than a decade. They have a dictator on one side, effectively, with Mahmoud Abbas. On the other side, in the Gaza Strip, they have Hamas. So several million run by one government, several million overseen by another government. So a lot of practical issues, I would say hundreds of practical issues that would need to be resolved for this to be seen as a state. But what you're really seeing here, despite the practical elements of it, which again, it doesn't really change anything, is that this is frustration with Israel and with the process. It's notable that Norway was among these countries. Norway, home to Oslo, home to the Oslo Peace Accords, which were negotiated more than 30 years ago to open up the talks here for an eventual Palestinian state. Now, those talks, effectively since about 07, 08, have been effectively frozen. So while in the 90s, early 2000s, you got to a point where the Palestinian Authority established itself over Gaza and the West Bank. Then eventually Hamas is partially elected and then launches a coup against the PA, creating these two governments. And so you haven't really had much in the way of talks, partially because of the violence, partially because the Israeli government of Netanyahu hasn't been interested in pursuing a real state or an eventual Palestinian state here. So what do you see from the Europeans? This is a nudge in that direction, feeling like, well, you're frustrated. Well, we're frustrated by the entire process, so we're going to recognize it anyway. And hopefully that's a nudge to the Israeli people to elect a government that recognizes the Palestinian state, saying, look, the rest of the world's recognizing it anyway. Now, what could also happen is that this reverses things, that makes things even more complicated, that this actually pushes more Israelis to the right because they're seeing that the world isn't waiting for them, because they're seeing that the world is not following the process that had been laid out, that this will be a negotiated state, that borders would have to be recognized here. And to your question about borders, well, if it's Hamas, they view the entire thing from the river to the sea as Palestine. So when you recognize a Palestinian state, as far as Hamas is concerned, you're recognizing that the entire piece of land, which also includes the 10 million Israelis, belongs to Palestine. The Palestinian Authority officially recognizes a two-state solution, Israel alongside Palestine, so they might see the borders of the West Bank and Gaza as part of a state, but that's part of the issue that was meant to be negotiated and was negotiated, and then the talks got frozen. So importantly here, this is a sign of where Israel stands right now with the Europeans who are frustrated by the Bibi government. Does it practically change stuff? Probably not. Though the Israelis do say this only reinforces to Hamas that October 7th got them recognition by several countries. So why wouldn't, as they say, do more October 7th? That's what Hamas has promised, because they feel like they're winning off of this, which is why you're seeing the US, UK, some other countries in Western Europe refrain right now, for now, from recognizing Palestine.
And Moshe, the other issue is the hostages. Israel is arguing that recognizing a Palestinian state right now could harm efforts to bring the hostages back home from Gaza. And on that note, the families of 7 female Israeli soldiers captured by Hamas during the October 7th attacks have released graphic footage of their abduction. A warning, if you are listening with kids, you may want to skip the next couple of minutes. This is all part of the family's effort to put pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the world to secure their release. The video shows the women lined up against a wall. Their hands are bound. The faces of some of the women you could see are bruised and bloodied. The most disturbing scenes have actually been edited out. This is footage that had previously been released by Hamas, according to the Hostages Families Forum. In the video, the terrorists could be heard referring to them as dogs and using the Arabic word sabhai, interpreted to mean captured women or slaves. 5 of the women are still believed to be held hostage. One of the girls' fathers told the New York Post, "This is a wake-up call to the world. Look what we are dealing with." look what we are dealing with.
So all the women in this horrific tape are 19 or 20 years old. The families are hoping by releasing this to stir public opinion in Israel. You already saw protests last night after the video was released, pushing the Israeli government to get a deal to bring them home, given how this is impacting the average Israelis. And talking to a couple of Israelis this week, so many of them are just like, we just want to bring the hostages home at this point, even as, they have the twin goal of defeating Hamas. We also have an update for you on that temporary pier the U.S. built in Gaza. We told you it opened last week, cost the U.S. more than $300 million to build this port to allow trucks to bring in aid from ships into the Gaza Strip. The goal, of course, to get more humanitarian aid in. So to date, the Pentagon says over 550 tons of humanitarian aid was delivered through that temporary pier over just a couple days through the weekend. But because of logistical issues, that has now been frozen for several days. And when I say logistical issues, I mean the Pentagon admits yesterday that none of the aid actually got to the intended people, that all of the aid that was brought in through the pier was stolen by Hamas, either other militant groups or just average Palestinians. In many cases, you've seen humanitarian aid then get resold in the marketplace at exorbitant prices inside the Gaza Strip. And so the Pentagon here, despite the pier, despite all the logistics, despite the planning, there's still no real distribution here inside Gaza. So as much as there's been talk about opening up more roads, more points of entry into Gaza, the issue is no longer points of entry. There are many of them, but how to actually get the aid once it's in Gaza to the intended places, given what is unfolding there. So that's something we'll continue to monitor.
Time for the speed read. Starting overseas from CBS News, July 4th in the United Kingdom this year will be Election Day. The British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called for new elections this summer as his ruling Conservative Party seeks to retain its 14-year hold on power in the face of poor polling against the opposition Labour Party. Sunak made that announcement in the rain outside of the Prime Minister's official London residence, 10 Downing Street. Protesters were blaring music. Sunak's center-right party has struggled to overcome a series of crises, including an economic slump and a revolving door of leaders in the past 2 years. The center-left Labour Party is strongly favored to defeat Sunak's party.
Yeah, Jill, just in the last 6 years in the UK, you've had the following prime ministers, Conservative prime ministers: David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, remember her, she was the 44-day prime minister, and now Rishi Sunak. So the Conservatives trying to ensure they abide by the law here. They had to call for an election before January 28th based on the parliamentary politics of that country. Still, it took some folks by surprise that he decided to go ahead this summer with it. Some Conservatives hoping they would have had a little more time before the fall to try to improve their polling. It's been a while since the Labour Party's been in control in that country. Remember Tony Blair back in the day, Gordon Brown? Well, it's been more than a decade now of Conservative leaders. The question is, can they continue to keep hold despite, Brexit, which took so long, and now there are questions about whether that was the right move. The cost of living crisis in the UK, posted over on the Mo News Premium account over the weekend that they have the highest per capita homeless in the developed world, more than the US if you count shelters. There's also issues in the country regarding asylum seekers and just a lot of division in the UK, in addition to economic concerns. So that is something we will watch as we celebrate here in the US on July 4th, our independence from the UK.
Back here at home from AccuWeather, a deadly tornado outbreak killed several people and caused major damage in multiple Iowa towns. Several tornadoes ripped a path of destruction across Iowa Tuesday afternoon and evening, leaving several people dead before tearing into parts of Illinois and Wisconsin. A storm chaser was one of the people pronounced dead after her car was blown off the road. One of the hardest hit areas was Greenfield, which is about 50 miles outside of Des Moines. A former Iowa state representative who lives near Greenfield said, quote, "There is basically nothing left."
Jill, just horrific images of the aftermath. We posted a clip over on the Instagram account last night. The Greenfield tornado has initially been rated an EF3 by the National Weather Service. It's a pretty significant tornado. There was drone footage we posted also of the storm that captured just the breadth of this tornado. Some of the more remarkable footage I've ever seen of a tornado as it's cutting through an area. A lot of incredible survival stories coming out. One man telling a local TV station there that they sheltered in the basement of the home when the storm moved through and the house completely blew off. They were in the basement, but his family got lucky and everyone survived. The governor in Iowa, that's Kim Reynolds, has authorized a proclamation of disaster emergency for about 15 counties. And Jill, we're just right now still in the beginning of tornado season, still got a couple months left in that part of the country.
From NBC News, U.S. lawmakers are asking officials in the Turks and Caicos Islands to show 5 Americans leniency after they accidentally brought ammunition in their luggage. They face up to 12 years in prison for the error. It comes after the popular tourist destination about 600 miles southeast of Miami, Florida, has imposed stricter gun and ammunition laws to combat rising violent crime and gun violence. Over the past 5 months, 5 Americans have been sent to jail and detained in Turks and Caicos after having bullets in their bags, but not guns. One of the detainees is a Florida grandmother. She said she works as a store manager and has a gun for protection that she has kept in that bag in the past. She said that the TSA agents in Orlando searched her carry-on before she left and confiscated her lotion and body spray, but did not catch the 2 stray bullets that led authorities in Turks and Caicos to arrest her.
Yeah, one of the few times you wish the TSA had taken more away from you. There was a delegation this week, Jill, of members of Congress that traveled to Turks and Caicos where they called for the leniency and said that, all these cases are people who inadvertently left ammunition in their luggage, didn't even bring a gun with them. There's the grandmother who had 2 bullets, another person who had 2 bullets, a 72-year-old who had 7 bullets, a husband and wife who had 4 bullets left over from deer hunting. One man apparently had 20 errant bullets in his luggage from a hunting trip. Lesson: search your luggage for errant bullets before you pack for an international trip. Jill, that's one thing in Turks. I've also told folks on this podcast before, there are countries where Adderall is considered a controlled substance and you could be arrested for that. So definitely beware of where you're going in the world and the various rules that they have. Again, the people here saying they intended no harm, that literally they just had bullets left over, or some fell into their luggage, that they had bullets left over from a hunting trip, or some fell into their luggage in the closet. But Turks and Caicos has very serious gun laws, apparently due to the fact that there was some gun violence and weapons trafficking in the past. And so these laws are meant to prevent that. They're being used in this case to punish those who, again, the grandmother traveled in with 2 bullets. Turks and Caicos has adjudicated 5 other cases of Americans charged with violating this law in the past, finding exceptional circumstances. One Indiana man pled guilty and was sentenced to 8 months in prison in the fall. The U.S. State Department here warning travelers, again, be vigilant about guns and ammunition as you travel abroad.
From CNBC, the class of 2024 is having a harder time landing jobs as hiring in tech and finance is waning. The overall labor market has proven resilient in the face of the Fed's aggressive rate hikes to fight inflation. For example, the healthcare sector has actually created more jobs, but growth in better paying industries like tech and finance has been a bit more uneven. Hiring in both sectors was down more than 20% in November compared to a year ago.
Yeah, healthcare jobs, as you mentioned, are up. Government jobs are up. There's certain sectors where people are still hiring. But there's a mismatch with grads, and we should mention that the unemployment rate is the lowest since the 1960s. But again, this speaks to sort of the feel of things and the data that you're seeing. Right now, according to LinkedIn, there are 2 applicants for every job. As of just a year and a half ago, there was 1 job opening for every single applicant. So things have gotten slightly more challenging based on the LinkedIn data there. This still is not 2008. For those millennials who remember that job market coming out of college, was extremely challenging for a number of people. Still for Gen Z, one of the more difficult years so far. And in some cases, you might get a job like the consulting firm Bain & Company, but then have your start dates being delayed due to their budget concerns.
Speaking of graduates and students, from the Washington Post, the Biden administration is canceling student loans for another 160,000 borrowers who are either enrolled in the president's repayment program, public servants, or have made repayments for decades. The Education Department announced the latest round of cancellations on Wednesday, saying that it will erase $7.7 billion in federal student loans. For everyone keeping score, the Biden administration has now canceled about $167 billion in loans for 4.75 million borrowers, or roughly 1 in 10 federal loan holders, wiping away $35,000 in debt on average.
So the latest relief here will go to 54,000 borrowers who are enrolled in Biden's new Saving on a Valuable Education Plan, the SAVE plan, that ties monthly student loan payments to earnings and family size. Another about 40,000 enrolled in earlier income-driven repayment programs that have been repaying their loans for 20 years. And so now they're saying, we'll clear you. Another 67,000 who are part of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, which erases the balances of nonprofit or government employees. This is just the latest in these incremental piecemeal debt relief plans that have been in the works since last year. That's when the Supreme Court ruled that President Biden's big plan, remember his plan to forgive up to $20,000 for up to 40 million eligible Americans. The Supreme Court ruled that was unconstitutional. So they went to Plan B at the White House, which is, how do we do this in a piecemeal way, using some existing laws to relieve debt for 100,000 people here, 200,000 people there. Ultimately, as you mentioned, they've hit about 5 million here. And there are plans to forgive student loan debt in smaller increments for up to 30 million people. They've, again, as part of this Plan B, finding existing laws and ways to do this that they believe are abiding by executive authority. At the same time, this is expected to face legal challenges like the major plan that was brought down in that ruling from the Supreme Court. So a number of Republican states are pushing back against these smaller plans.
And now to a possible push to ban an ingredient that's common in decaf coffee. This from Axios. Drinking decaf coffee has long been considered a safe way to enjoy a cup of joe for those cutting back on caffeine. But some environmental groups and lawmakers are raising alarms about the most common method used to decaffeinate coffee. So most coffee companies use what's called the European method of making decaf coffee. Starbucks calls it, quote, the direct contact method. It typically involves a controversial chemical, methylene chloride. Methylene chloride is considered a potential carcinogen by OSHA. Now, in the European method, coffee beans are steamed and rinsed with methylene chloride, and then the liquid is removed along with much of the caffeine. The National Coffee Association says the coffee beans are then washed, steamed, and roasted at temperatures that cause the liquids to evaporate. The process removes about 97% or more of the caffeine from the coffee beans. So instead of 96 milligrams of caffeine in a cup, it's more like 2.
So, Jill, I've seen some headlines out there saying they're trying to ban decaf coffee. They're not trying to ban decaf coffee. It's a process here that is being looked at by the FDA. So there's a petition that was brought by some groups, including the Environmental Defense Fund, their environmental group, to ban methylene chloride in food. That's at the federal level. They're looking at this petition. At the state level, the California Assembly is considering legislation called the Clean Coffee Act. Now, at the same time, we should tell you, methylene chloride present in decaf coffee was below the 10 parts per million FDA limit in a recent test conducted by the Clean Label Project. That's another environmental group. So there's debate here, even among the environmental groups. And if you listen to our recent podcast over on the Mo News interview pod with the host of the Unbiased Science podcast, we had her on this podcast. We talked about how, when these environmental groups put out some of this, they sometimes don't talk about the amount. And in this case, while there's methylene chloride, it's again at a level that the FDA has considered safe. And we should mention here, Jill, the National Coffee Association has chimed in. They say they have not seen compelling evidence from environmental groups that this is harmful and should be banned. So enjoy. So as far as we're concerned, Jill, I take that as a green light to enjoy your 5 p.m., 6 p.m. decaf coffee.
That's right. For anyone drinking decaf, go on, enjoy. Go
on
with your bad selves.
Live your life, because otherwise we're just like, what can't I do now? What's poisoning me these days?
Well, that's the joke of it, because I'm sure for the people who are drinking decaf, it's probably for some health reason where they're trying to cut back on caffeine.
Right.
I know when I was pregnant, I used to drink decaf coffee instead of regular coffee.
Tea.
And lo and behold, a lot of tea has caffeine.
You're right. And then there's that tea recall, that tea bag recall from one of those brands over the weekend. We told you about it on the Instagram account. Anyway, Jill, it's time for On This Day in History. On this May 23rd, we begin with one of our favorite founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. On this day in 1785, he revealed his design for what would later be called bifocal glasses. Don't forget, Benjamin Franklin, not just a diplomat, not just a government official, but an inventor of many incredible things. If you have time, There is a very long biography that Walter Isaacson wrote about him that is fascinating.
I don't have time. But thanks for the recommendation.
Jill's like, I will learn what I need to about Benjamin Franklin from On This Day in History.
That is what you're for, Moshe.
That's what I read the biographies so you don't have to. Jill, on this day in 1911, in a ceremony presided over by President Taft, the New York Public Library was dedicated, we should note, when you pass the New York Public Library, I will tell anyone who's with me, this is the largest marble structure ever constructed in the U.S. On this day in 1934, Bonnie and Clyde, the notorious American outlaws, were killed in a police shootout in Louisiana. Clyde Barrow and his companion, Bonnie Parker, were shot to death by officers on this day in 1934 after one of the most colorful and spectacular manhunts in U.S. history. They had captured the attention of the country, who became transfixed by the couple's criminal exploits and their illicit romance. They were on the run for about 2 years, getting national attention after some photos of the couple were discovered at a crime scene in 1933. The FBI, or I should say the precursor to the FBI, became interested in them, followed them for 2 years, finally getting to them on this day in 1934. They were believed to have committed 13 murders and a number of robberies before the feds got to them. And we end here with a bit of music news. 24 years ago today, Eminem releases the Marshall Mathers LP, Stan, Real Slim Shady, The Way I Am. It became the fastest selling album in the history of rap. Jill, he's Marshall Mathers, he's Eminem, he's Slim Shady. He's a man of many names. All right, a bit of TV history before we end here. 30 years ago today, Star Trek The Next Generation ended. And we also said goodbye to this classic from TGI Fridays. On this day, 29 years ago, we said goodbye to Joey, Jesse, DJ Tanner, the whole crew over at Full House. After 8 seasons on ABC, and most recently, of course, they brought it back for a few seasons on Netflix called Fuller House.
How rude.
Cut it out.
Moshe, where were you when you learned that Michelle was actually played by twins? I remember my mind being blown when I heard that.
This is pre-internet, so this is something you would learn in school that like someone would tell you in the schoolyard, like, do you know blah, blah, blah? And you're like, what? What is that? No way. But Jill, shortly thereafter, Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen would release all those movies. And so, they reinforced that there were 2 of them pretty young.
All right, with that thrilling piece of trivia, we want to thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. And if you're a premium member, you have access today to my interview with Will Trubridge. Who's Will Trubridge? He's one of the few people in the world that can dive and hold their breath for more than 4 minutes. He's a free diver. You might have seen The Longest Breath on Netflix last year. I spoke to him recently. Jill, it's a fascinating conversation about how he literally, what he says, he turns off his brain to spend more than 4 minutes underwater. The competition's incredible. He actually told me that he can hold his breath for 8 minutes if he's not moving, more than 4 minutes if he's diving, and how he does that and how he applies the lessons from underwater into the above ground breathing air world. So that's Will Trubridge. That's on the Premium Podcast. To get access to that, join Mo News Premium, mo.news/premium for access to our members only Instagram feed, our exclusive Premium Podcast, and to learn how to hold your breath for 4 minutes underwater. All right, everyone.
He goes through it with me, and I'm gonna give it a shot this weekend when I'm in the pool for Memorial Day weekend.
I was going to say, good luck with that. Just please don't try it when you're at my house and doing it in my pool. I don't want to be held responsible.
Got it, Jill.
All right, everyone. Have a happy Friday Eve.